The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty trading post. And when the door opened, a woman stepped down into the Arizona heat, wearing clothes so tattered and filthy that several onlookers turned away in pity. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face streaked with grime. Her feet were wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been part of a shawl, and the dress she wore barely held together at the seams. She carried nothing, not even a small bag or bundle, and as she stood there in the blazing sun of Agua Caliente in the summer of 1878, she looked like someone who had lost everything worth losing. Harrison Bridger was checking the cinch on his horse's saddle when he first saw her. He had just ridden in from his small ranch about 5 miles outside of town, bringing in a few head of cattle to sell to the butcher. At 26 years old, Harrison was lean and weathered from years of hard work under the Arizona sun, with sandy brown hair that perpetually needed cutting and gray eyes that had learned to read the land and the sky with equal precision. He had been working his 160 acres for 4 years now, ever since he had saved enough money from working cattle drives to file his homestead claim. It was not much, just a modest house he had built himself, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and enough grazing land to support a small herd, but it was his, and he took pride in every fence post and water trough. He watched the woman take a few unsteady steps away from the stagecoach, saw the way she swayed slightly as if the ground beneath her feet was still moving. The driver tossed down a mail sack and called something to the station keeper, then climbed back up to his seat without a second glance at his passenger. The horses stamped and snorted, eager to move on after their brief stop, and within moments, the coach was rolling away in a cloud of dust, leaving the woman standing alone in the middle of the street. Harrison tied off his horse and crossed the dusty expanse toward her. Up close, he could see that beneath the grime and exhaustion, she was probably around his own age, maybe a year or two younger. Her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, almost gold in the bright sunlight, and despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something in the way she held herself that spoke of determination rather than defeat. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. She turned those amber eyes on him, and for a moment, she just stared as if trying to decide whether he was real or some mirage brought on by heat and hunger. "I need work," she said finally, her voice hoarse and cracking. "Any kind of work. I can clean, I can cook, I can mend clothing or tend animals or whatever needs doing." Harrison glanced around the street, aware that several people were watching this exchange with interest. Agua Caliente was a small town, barely 300 people when everyone was counted, and strangers always drew attention. A woman arriving alone in such obvious distress would be the talk of every dinner table by nightfall. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She hesitated, then said quietly, 2 days ago. Some hardtack a freight wagon driver shared. Harrison made a decision. "Come with me. The hotel has a dining room. We will get you some food and then we can talk about work." She looked at him with suspicion and something that might have been fear. "I do not have any money to pay for a meal." "I did not ask if you did," Harrison said simply. He gestured toward the small hotel at the end of the street. "My name is Harrison Bridger. I have a ranch outside of town. I am not trying to take advantage of you, miss. I am just offering you a meal." The woman studied his face for a long moment, and Harrison had the distinct impression that she was weighing everything about him, measuring his intentions against experiences he could only guess at. Finally, she gave a small nod. "My name is Miriam Blackwell," she said, "and I would be grateful for the meal." They walked together down the sun-baked street, Harrison matching his stride to her slower, uncertain pace. He could see how her wrapped feet hurt her with every step, could see the way she held herself rigidly upright as if afraid that if she relaxed even slightly, she would collapse entirely. When they reached the hotel, he held the door open for her, and she stepped inside with visible relief at escaping the punishing heat. The dining room was nearly empty at this hour, midway between breakfast and lunch. Harrison guided Miriam to a table near the window and pulled out a chair for her. She sat down carefully, as if the simple wooden chair was something precious that might break under her weight. Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman who ran the hotel with her husband, emerged from the kitchen and raised her eyebrows at the sight of Miriam but said nothing beyond taking their order. "Bring us whatever you have ready," Harrison said, "and plenty of it, and water, please." Mrs. Chen nodded and disappeared back into the kitchen. Harrison turned his attention back to Miriam, who was looking around the dining room with the intensity of someone cataloging every detail. The walls were decorated with a few faded paintings of mountain landscapes. The tables were covered with red checked cloths, and the whole place smelled of bacon grease and coffee. "How did you end up in Agua Caliente?" Harrison asked gently. Miriam's hands were folded on the table in front of her, and he noticed that her knuckles were scraped raw and her nails were broken and dirty. "I was traveling to California," she said. "My husband died of fever in New Mexico, and I was trying to reach my sister in Sacramento. But in Tucson, someone stole what little money I had left. The stagecoach driver said he would let me ride to Agua Caliente since it was on his route anyway, but he could not take me any farther without payment." "I am sorry about your husband," Harrison said. She looked down at her hands. "We had only been married 6 months. We left Missouri thinking we would make our fortune in California. Instead, he died in a tent in the desert, and I could not even afford a proper headstone for his grave." Mrs. Chen returned with 2 plates piled high with eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and thick slices of bread, along with 2 glasses of water. Miriam stared at the food as if she could not quite believe it was real. Harrison picked up his fork and began eating, giving her tacit permission to do the same. She ate like someone who had learned to be hungry, quickly but not frantically, with a focused attention that suggested she was making a conscious effort not to make herself sick by eating too fast after days of deprivation. Harrison ate more slowly, watching her between bites and trying to figure out what to do next. The truth was, he could use help at the ranch. Since his mother had died the previous winter, he had been managing everything alone. The house was a mess. His clothes needed mending, and he had been eating nothing but beans and cornmeal for months because he was too busy with the cattle and the land to do much cooking. But hiring a single woman to live and work on his ranch would cause talk in town. People would assume things, would make judgments, and Miriam had already been through enough without having her reputation further damaged by association with him. On the other hand, she clearly needed help, and he was not the kind of man who could turn away from someone in genuine distress. "I have a proposition for you," he said when she had finished eating and was working on her second glass of water. "Like I said, I have a ranch outside of town. It is not big, just me and about 30 head of cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden that is mostly weeds right now. My mother lived with me until she passed last December, and since then, the place has gotten away from me a bit. I could use someone to help with the cooking and cleaning, tending the garden, that sort of thing. In exchange, I can offer you room and board and a small wage. Nothing fancy, but enough to save up for a ticket to California if that is still where you want to go." Miriam set down her glass and looked at him directly. "Why would you do this? You do not know me. I could be a thief or worse." "Could be," Harrison agreed, "but I do not think you are. And everyone deserves a chance to get back on their feet. People will talk, she said. A single man and a single woman living under the same roof. They will, Harrison acknowledged. But I figure if we are both honest and decent about it, and if you make a point of coming into town for church on Sundays and such, folks will see that it is just a working arrangement and nothing improper. Miriam was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes studying his face again with that same intense scrutiny. Finally, she said, I accept your proposition, Mr. Bridger, and I promise you I will work hard. I will earn my keep. I do not doubt it, Harrison said. But first, we need to get you cleaned up and find you some proper clothes and shoes. That dress looks like it might fall apart if you sneeze. A faint smile crossed Miriam's face, the first real expression he had seen from her beyond exhaustion and weariness. It very well might, she admitted. Harrison paid Mrs. Chen for the meal and then led Miriam down the street to the general store. Inside, the proprietor, a round-faced man named Samuel Martinez, looked up from his ledger and greeted Harrison with a nod. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Miriam, but he had the good grace not to comment on her appearance. Sam, we need to outfit Miss Blackwell here with some practical clothes, Harrison said. A couple of work dresses, a pair of boots, undergarments, whatever a lady needs. Can you help us out? Sam glanced at Miriam, then back at Harrison, clearly curious but too polite to ask the questions that were probably burning in his mind. Sure thing, Harrison. Mrs. Martinez is in the back. She can help the lady with the sizing and such. Mrs. Martinez, a stout woman with kind eyes and graying hair, emerged from the storeroom and took in Miriam's condition with a single comprehensive glance. Without saying a word about the ragged clothes or dirty face, she simply smiled and said, Come with me, dear. Let us find you something comfortable. While Miriam was in the back of the store with Mrs. Martinez, Harrison wandered the aisles, picking up a few supplies he needed for the ranch. He grabbed a sack of flour, some coffee, sugar, a few tins of beans, and some dried apples. By the time he had finished, Miriam was emerging from the back room wearing a simple calico dress in a dark blue pattern, with a clean white apron tied around her waist. Her feet were now properly shod in sturdy leather boots, and Mrs. Martinez had clearly helped her wash her face and hands, because the grime was gone, revealing skin that was deeply tanned but unmarked by any illness or injury. Her hair was still a tangled mess, but it was tied back with a piece of ribbon, making her look considerably more presentable. The transformation was remarkable. In clean clothes and with the worst of the dirt removed, Miriam was actually quite striking. She had high cheekbones and a strong jaw, with those unusual amber eyes that seemed to catch and hold the light. Harrison realized he was staring and quickly looked away, focusing his attention on the pile of goods on the counter. Add it all to my account, Sam, Harrison said. Now hold on, Miriam said, stepping forward. I cannot accept charity. Those clothes, they must cost a good amount. Take it out of my wages. We will work it out, Harrison said. Do not worry about it right now. Miriam looked like she wanted to argue, but Mrs. Martinez patted her arm gently and said, Take the kindness, dear. The Lord knows you will have plenty of opportunities to pay it forward in this life. They left the general store with Miriam's old clothes wrapped in brown paper, which she insisted on keeping, saying the fabric might be useful for rags or patching. Harrison loaded the supplies into his saddlebags and then turned to face the problem of transportation. He had ridden into town on horseback, which meant there was no easy way to get Miriam out to the ranch unless she rode with him. Have you ever ridden a horse? He asked. A few times back in Missouri, Miriam said. Not recently, though. Well, you are about to get a refresher, Harrison said. He untied his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Jack, and swung up into the saddle. Then he extended his hand down to Miriam. "Step on my boot and I will pull you up." She hesitated for just a moment, then took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong despite the rough condition of her hands. Harrison pulled, she stepped, and a moment later she was seated behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. He could feel how thin she was through the new dress, could feel the way she tensed at the unfamiliar position. "Just hold on and move with the horse," he said. "It is only about 5 miles. We will take it slow." He guided Jack out of town at an easy walk, letting the horse pick his own pace. The sun was high overhead now, the heat shimmering off the desert in visible waves. Around them, the landscape was a study in browns and muted greens. Sagebrush and creosote, palo verde trees and scattered mesquite, with the distant mountains rising blue and hazy on the horizon. It was harsh country, unforgiving to those who did not respect it, but Harrison had come to love it in the 4 years he had been here. There was an honesty to the desert, a clarity that he had never found in more civilized places. Behind him, Miriam was silent, but he could feel her gradually relaxing as the rhythm of the horse's gait became familiar. After a while, she said quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Bridger, for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not helped me." "Call me Harrison," he said. "And you do not need to thank me. I am getting help with the ranch in exchange. It is a fair trade." "Still," she said, "you did not have to. Most people would have just walked past." Harrison thought about that for a moment. "I guess I figure the world is hard enough without us making it harder for each other," he said finally. "We help where we can, and we hope someone will do the same for us if we ever need it." They rode on in companionable silence, the only sounds the steady clopping of Jack's hooves, the creak of leather, and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. After about an hour, Harrison's ranch came into view. It was not much to look at. A small wooden house with a covered porch, a barn that definitely needed some repairs, a chicken coop, and several fenced corrals. But the land itself was good, with a reliable spring that fed into a small creek running through the property, providing water for the cattle and the garden. Harrison guided Jack up to the house and dismounted, then helped Miriam down. She stood for a moment, looking around at the ranch with an expression he could not quite read. "It is not fancy," he said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "But it is solid. The roof does not leak and the walls keep out most of the snakes." "Most of the snakes?" Miriam asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, you are in Arizona," Harrison said with a slight grin. "Snakes are part of the deal, but I keep the area around the house clear of brush and rocks where they like to hide, so we do not get many actually inside." He led her up the steps to the porch and opened the front door. Inside, the house was dim and blessedly cooler than the outside. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a wood stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a few comfortable seats near the fireplace. A doorway led to 2 small bedrooms, and another door opened onto a small pantry. "You can have my mother's old room," Harrison said, pushing open one of the bedroom doors. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "I have not changed anything since she passed. Her clothes are still in the dresser, and I think you are about the same size. You are welcome to them if you want." Miriam stepped into the room and ran her hand over the patchwork quilt on the bed. "Are you sure? These were your mother's things." "She would want them to be used," Harrison said. "She was practical that way. No point in letting good clothes sit in a drawer when someone needs them." Miriam nodded slowly. "I will take good care of them, and of your house, I promise." "I know you will," Harrison said. "Why do not you rest for a bit? You have had a long journey and you must be exhausted. I need to check on the cattle and make sure everything is secure for the night. We can talk about the work routine tomorrow." He left her there and went back outside, giving her privacy to settle in. The afternoon stretched ahead of him, filled with the familiar tasks of ranch life. Checking the fences, making sure the water troughs were full, counting the cattle to ensure none had wandered off or fallen prey to a mountain lion or coyote. It was good, honest work, the kind that left him tired in body but satisfied in spirit. As he worked, his thoughts kept drifting back to Miriam. There was something about her that intrigued him beyond simple compassion for her situation. She had been through something terrible, losing her husband and all her possessions, but she had not let it break her. There was steel in her, a core of strength that he recognized because he saw it in himself. Life had knocked them both down at various points, but they kept getting back up, kept moving forward, because that was what you did if you wanted to survive. By the time he finished his work and returned to the house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He found Miriam in the kitchen, wearing one of his mother's old aprons over her new dress. She had found the supplies he had bought earlier and was in the process of making biscuits, her hands working the dough with practiced efficiency. "You did not have to start cooking tonight," Harrison said. "I would have figured something out." "I know," Miriam said without looking up from her work, "but I wanted to. It felt good to do something normal, something useful." Harrison watched her for a moment, then went to wash up at the basin by the back door. By the time he had cleaned off the day's dust and dirt, Miriam had biscuits in the oven and was frying salt pork in a skillet. The smell made his mouth water, and he realized he had not had a proper home-cooked meal in months. They ate together at the kitchen table, the silence between them more comfortable now. The biscuits were perfect, fluffy and golden, and the salt pork was crispy on the edges and tender in the middle. Harrison could not remember the last time he had eaten so well. "This is delicious," he said. "You are a good cook." "My mother taught me," Miriam said. "She always said that being able to cook well was a skill that would serve me no matter where life took me. I guess she was right." "Tell me about Missouri," Harrison said. "What was it like growing up there?" Miriam was quiet for a moment, and he thought maybe he had pushed too far, asked something too personal. But then she started talking, her voice soft but steady. "We had a small farm outside of Independence. My father raised corn and hogs, and my mother kept a big vegetable garden and some chickens. I had 3 brothers, all older than me. They used to tease me relentlessly, but they also taught me how to ride and shoot and handle myself. When I met Daniel, my husband, he was working as a clerk in a store in town. He was kind and gentle, and he had big dreams about going west and starting over in California. He convinced me that we could build a better life there, away from the crowded towns and played-out land." "But it did not work out that way," Harrison said quietly. "No," Miriam agreed. "It did not." Daniel was not cut out for frontier life. He was too soft, too trusting. He got sick just a few weeks after we left Missouri, and he never really recovered. By the time we reached New Mexico, he was so weak he could barely walk. He died in my arms, telling me to keep going, to reach California and make the life we had dreamed about." "And you tried," Harrison said. "I tried," Miriam confirmed. "But I ran out of money and I ran out of luck, until today when you decided to help a stranger for no good reason." "There is always a good reason to help someone in need," Harrison said, "even if it is just because it is the right thing to do." They finished their meal and cleaned up together, falling into an easy rhythm that suggested they would work well as partners, at least in the domestic sense. When the dishes were washed and put away, Miriam excused herself to her room, and Harrison sat on the porch for a while, smoking his pipe and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He thought about what it would be like to have someone else living here again. After his mother had died, the silence had been oppressive, a constant reminder that he was alone in the world with no family, no wife, no children to carry on after him. He had been thinking about finding a wife, but in a small town like Agua Caliente, the eligible women were few and far between, and most of them were too young or already spoken for. Miriam was different. She was his age, mature and capable, with a quiet strength that he admired. But she was also a widow, grieving her lost husband and lost dreams, and he had no right to think of her as anything other than an employee, someone he was helping out of Christian charity and practical need. Still, as he sat there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the desert night, he could not help but wonder what might develop between them, given time and proximity. He was not a romantic man, had never put much stock in the notion of love at first sight or fated encounters. But there was something about Miriam Blackwell that made him think that maybe, just maybe, his luck was about to change. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Miriam proved to be everything she had promised: a hard worker, an excellent cook, and someone who took pride in maintaining the house and garden. She rose early every morning, often before Harrison himself, and by the time he came in from his first round of chores, she would have coffee brewing and breakfast ready. The house, which had been slowly descending into bachelor chaos during the months after his mother's death, began to look like a proper home again. Curtains were washed and mended, floors were swept and scrubbed, and the vegetable garden was weeded and watered until it began to produce a respectable crop of tomatoes, squash, and beans. Harrison found himself looking forward to the end of each workday, when he could return to the house and find Miriam there, usually covered in flour or dirt from the garden, but always with a smile and a warm meal ready. They talked during dinner, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Harrison learned that Miriam had always wanted children, but had never gotten pregnant during her brief marriage. Miriam learned that Harrison had come west from Ohio after his father had died, and his mother had wanted to make a fresh start somewhere with more opportunity. As July turned to August, and the brutal heat of the Arizona summer bore down on them, Harrison began to notice changes in himself. He found himself thinking about Miriam at odd moments during the day, wondering what she was doing, whether she was staying cool enough, whether she might like him to bring home some small treat from town. He began to take more care with his appearance, making sure to wash thoroughly before dinner and keeping his hair trimmed neater than he usually bothered with. He started fixing things around the house that he had been putting off for months, wanting to make the ranch as comfortable and pleasant for her as possible. He told himself it was just gratitude, just appreciation for all the work she was doing. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was falling in love with Miriam Blackwell, slowly and steadily, like water wearing away at stone. The trouble was, he had no idea if she felt the same way. She was always kind to him, always pleasant and hardworking, but there was a wall around her heart that he could sense but not breach. She was still grieving her husband, still processing the trauma of the past months, and Harrison knew that pushing her toward something romantic before she was ready would be unfair and potentially damaging. So he waited and he worked, and he tried to be the kind of man she could depend on, someone solid and reliable who would be there when she was ready to move forward with her life. One evening in late August, Harrison came back to the house to find Miriam sitting on the porch steps, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He was off his horse in an instant, dropping to his knees beside her. "Miriam, what is wrong? Are you hurt?" he asked, his heart pounding with sudden fear. She looked up at him, her amber eyes red and swollen from crying. "I am sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I do not know what came over me. I just suddenly felt so overwhelmed, so tired of being strong and keeping everything together. I miss Daniel. I miss my family. I miss feeling like I belong somewhere." Harrison did not think, did not calculate or consider propriety. He simply pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair, the other wrapped firmly around her back. She clung to him like a drowning person clings to a piece of driftwood, and he let her, murmuring soft reassurances that everything would be all right, that she was safe, that she was not alone. They stayed like that for a long time, until Miriam's sobs gradually subsided into hiccuping breaths and then finally into silence. When she pulled back, her face was blotchy and wet, but there was something different in her eyes, a softness that had not been there before. "I am sorry," she said again. "That was not very professional of me." "Stop apologizing," Harrison said gently. "You are allowed to have feelings, Miriam. You have been through hell these past months. No one expects you to be strong all the time." "You have been so good to me," she said. "I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness." "You do not owe me anything," Harrison said. "You have been earning your keep and then some. This arrangement has been good for both of us." Miriam looked at him for a long moment, and Harrison could see something shifting in her expression, some internal decision being made. "Harrison," she said slowly, "I need to tell you something. I need to be honest with you." "All right," he said, settling back on his heels and giving her space. "When I first came here, I was just grateful to have food and shelter and a chance to rest," Miriam said. "I was not thinking beyond surviving one day at a time. But these past weeks, living here with you, seeing how good and decent you are, how hard you work and how much you care about this land and this life you are building, I have started to feel things that I did not expect to feel. Things that confuse me and make me feel guilty because I am supposed to still be in mourning for Daniel." Harrison's heart began to beat faster. "What kind of things?" he asked quietly. Miriam took a deep breath. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said. "And I do not know what to do about it." For a moment, Harrison could not speak. The words he had been hoping to hear but had not dared to expect hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Then he reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I am falling in love with you too," he said. "I have been for weeks now, but I did not want to say anything because I thought you needed time, needed space to heal and figure out what you wanted." "I did need that," Miriam said, "and I still have healing to do. But I think I have realized something important. Daniel was a good man, and I will always care about him and miss him. But what we had was young love, idealistic and untested. It did not survive the harsh realities of the world. What I feel for you is different. It is built on shared work and mutual respect, and the knowledge that you are someone I can rely on, someone who sees me as I am and does not turn away." "I do see you," Harrison said, "and I think you are one of the strongest, most remarkable people I have ever met." Miriam squeezed his hand. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "We take it slow," Harrison said. "We give ourselves time to be sure, and when we are both ready, we figure out what comes next, together." She smiled at him, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "Together," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." Over the next few months, their relationship deepened and evolved. They were careful about propriety, aware that the town was already gossiping about the arrangement. Miriam made a point of attending church every Sunday and being friendly with the other women in town, gradually winning them over with her quiet competence and genuine kindness. Harrison was careful never to touch her in public beyond offering his arm when they walked, never to give anyone ammunition to say that something improper was happening at his ranch. But in private, when they were alone at the ranch, they allowed themselves small intimacies. They held hands while sitting on the porch in the evenings. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Harrison taught Miriam how to shoot a rifle so she could defend herself if needed when he was out working the far corners of the ranch. Miriam taught Harrison how to make his mother's biscuit recipe, laughing as he fumbled with the dough and got flour all over himself. In September, Harrison took Miriam to a dance in town, the annual harvest celebration that marked the end of summer. She wore a dress that had belonged to his mother, a pretty green cotton with lace at the collar, and she had pinned her hair up in a style that made her look both elegant and approachable. Harrison wore his best shirt and his cleanest trousers, and as they walked into the town hall together, he felt a surge of pride at having her on his arm. They danced together, spinning around the floor to the music of a fiddle and guitar. Harrison was not a particularly graceful dancer, but Miriam did not seem to mind, laughing when he stepped on her toes and guiding him through the more complicated steps. Other couples joined them on the floor, and Harrison noticed that several of the women were being friendly to Miriam, asking her about the ranch and complimenting her dress. It seemed she had succeeded in establishing herself as a respectable member of the community, which relieved him more than he wanted to admit. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was cool, a welcome change from the brutal heat of summer, and the stars were brilliant overhead. Harrison led Miriam away from the crowded entrance to a quieter spot behind the building where they could be alone for a moment. "Are you having a good time?" he asked. "I am," Miriam said. "Thank you for bringing me. It has been a long time since I felt like I was part of something, part of a community." "You are part of this community now," Harrison said, "and you are part of my life. I hope you know how much that means to me." Miriam looked up at him, and in the moonlight her eyes seemed to glow. "I do know," she said softly, "and I want you to know how much you mean to me. You saved my life, Harrison. Not just by giving me food and shelter, but by giving me a reason to keep going, a reason to believe that life could be good again." Harrison cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheekbones. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gently at first, then with more passion as she responded, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. The kiss was sweet and deep, full of all the feelings they had been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Miriam," he said. "I know it has not been very long, but I am sure I want to spend my life with you." "I love you too," she said. "And I want that too. But Harrison, I need to tell you something. I am not who you think I am." Harrison pulled back slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" Miriam took a deep breath. "My name really is Miriam Blackwell, and I really was married to a man named Daniel who died in New Mexico. But there is more to the story. Things I did not tell you because I was afraid. Daniel was not just a store clerk. He was the son of a wealthy merchant in Independence. When we decided to marry, his father disowned him because he thought I was beneath his son. We left for California partly because of our dreams, but also because we had nowhere else to go. When Daniel died, I wrote to his father, hoping he would at least help with the burial expenses. Instead, he wrote back saying that Daniel was no son of his, and that I was a gold digger who had trapped his boy into a foolish marriage." She paused, and Harrison could see tears forming in her eyes. He took her hands again, squeezing gently to let her know he was listening, that he was not going anywhere. "The money that was stolen in Tucson was not much, maybe $20, Miriam continued. It was all I had left from selling everything Daniel and I owned. But the truth is, even if I had kept that money, it would not have been enough to reach California. I had no plan, no real hope of finding my sister. I do not even know if she is still in Sacramento, or if she would take me in if I showed up on her doorstep. When I got off that stagecoach in Agua Caliente, I was not just poor and desperate. I was completely lost, with no idea what I was going to do next. "Why are you telling me this now?" Harrison asked gently. "Because you said you want to spend your life with me, and you deserve to know the truth," Miriam said. "You deserve to know that I am not some tragic widow with a respectable past. I am a woman whose husband's family thought she was trash, a woman who has nothing and no one. If you change your mind about me, I will understand." Harrison was quiet for a moment, processing what she had told him. Then he pulled her close again, wrapping his arms around her. "Miriam, I do not care about any of that," he said firmly. "I do not care what Daniel's father thought of you, or how much money you had or did not have when you arrived here. The woman I fell in love with is strong and kind and hardworking. She makes the best biscuits I have ever tasted. She can shoot a rifle better than half the men in this town, and she lights up my life in ways I did not even know were possible. That is all that matters to me." Miriam made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You really mean that, do not you?" "I really do," Harrison said. "When I first saw you step off that stagecoach, I did not see a woman in rags with nothing. I saw someone who needed help, and I thought maybe I could provide it. But you gave me so much more than I gave you. You turned my house back into a home. You reminded me what it feels like to have someone to talk to, someone to share my life with. You made me understand that I did not want to be alone anymore." "I do not want to be alone anymore either," Miriam said. "I want to be with you." "Then marry me," Harrison said. "Not because you need security or a place to stay, but because we love each other and we want to build a life together." Miriam pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure? You do not have to feel obligated just because I have been living at your ranch." "I am not asking out of obligation," Harrison said. "I am asking because I cannot imagine my future without you in it. I do not need riches, Miriam. I do not need land or gold or anything else. I need you, just you." Fresh tears spilled down Miriam's cheeks, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Harrison kissed her again, longer and sweeter this time, and when they finally returned to the dance, hand in hand, everyone could see the change in them. By the end of the evening, the news had spread throughout the town. Harrison Bridger and Miriam Blackwell were engaged to be married. They were married 6 weeks later, in early November, in the small church at the center of Agua Caliente. Miriam wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Martinez had helped her sew, and Harrison wore his best suit, which he had to have altered because he had lost weight during the months after his mother's death. The church was full of townspeople, neighbors and friends who had come to witness the union, and the ceremony was conducted by the circuit preacher who passed through once a month. As Harrison stood at the altar watching Miriam walk down the aisle toward him, he felt a sense of rightness that he had never experienced before. This was his future, this beautiful, strong woman who had come into his life when he least expected it, and changed everything for the better. When the preacher asked if he would take Miriam to be his lawfully wedded wife, Harrison's voice was strong and clear. "I do," he said, and when Miriam said the same, her amber eyes locked on his, he felt like the luckiest man in the world. The reception was held in the town hall, with tables laden with food that various townspeople had contributed. There was roasted beef and chicken, fresh bread and butter, several kinds of pie, and even a small wedding cake that Mrs. Chen had baked as a gift. Harrison and Miriam danced their first dance as husband and wife, and then spent the rest of the evening mingling with their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. As the sun began to set and the party began to wind down, Harrison and Miriam said their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch together. This time, Miriam rode her own horse, a gentle mare that Harrison had bought for her as a wedding present. The ride home was peaceful, the desert landscape painted in shades of gold and purple by the setting sun. When they arrived at the ranch, Harrison helped Miriam down from her horse, and then, in a gesture that made her laugh with delight, he swept her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold of the house. Inside, everything was exactly as they had left it, but somehow it felt different now. This was not just a place where they lived and worked together. It was their home, the foundation of the life they were building as husband and wife. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and satisfied. Afterwards, lying in each other's arms in the bed that Harrison had built with his own hands, Miriam traced lazy patterns on his chest and said, "I never thought I would be this happy again. After Daniel died, after everything that happened, I thought the best I could hope for was survival. But you gave me so much more than that. We gave each other more than that," Harrison corrected gently. "We found each other at exactly the right time when we both needed someone to believe in." "Do you think it was fate?" Miriam asked. "That stagecoach driver just happening to drop me in Agua Caliente. You just happening to be in town that day. You being the kind of man who would stop to help a stranger." "Maybe," Harrison said. "Or maybe we make our own fate by the choices we make. Either way, I am grateful for it." "So am I," Miriam said, snuggling closer to him. "So am I." The first year of their marriage was not without its challenges. The winter of 1878 was harsh, with cold winds and occasional snow that made ranch work difficult and uncomfortable. The cattle needed extra feed to get through the lean months, and Harrison spent long hours breaking ice in the water troughs and checking on the herd to make sure none were sick or injured. Miriam worked just as hard, keeping the house warm and comfortable, cooking hearty meals to sustain them through the demanding days, and helping with the outdoor chores whenever she could. But despite the hardships, or perhaps because of them, their bond grew stronger. They learned to work together as a true partnership, each supporting the other when times were tough. They talked through problems and made decisions jointly, respecting each other's opinions and expertise. When Harrison was exhausted from a long day dealing with a difficult birth in the herd, Miriam would rub his shoulders and make him laugh with stories from her day. When Miriam was frustrated with a cooking experiment gone wrong or a broken piece of equipment, Harrison would patiently help her fix the problem and remind her that mistakes were just part of learning. In the spring of 1879, Miriam discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and queasy for a few weeks, and Mrs. Martinez, who served as the town's unofficial midwife, confirmed what Miriam had begun to suspect. The news filled both of them with joy and a little bit of fear. They knew that childbirth was dangerous, especially out here where medical help was limited, but they also knew that this was what they both wanted. A family, children to love and raise and pass their ranch on to someday. Harrison became even more protective of Miriam during her pregnancy, insisting that she rest more and not overwork herself. Miriam tolerated his concern with good humor, even as she continued to do as much as she could around the house and garden. She felt strong and healthy throughout most of the pregnancy, and she took pride in the way her body changed and grew to accommodate the new life within her. In late November, as the weather began to cool again, Miriam went into labor. Mrs. Martinez came to stay at the ranch, and Harrison paced the floor anxiously as the labor progressed. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Harrison feared he might lose both his wife and his child. But Miriam was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and in the early morning hours of November 28th, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Harrison held his son for the first time with shaking hands, overcome with emotion at the tiny, perfect life he and Miriam had created together. The baby had Miriam's amber eyes and Harrison's light brown hair, and he wailed lustily, announcing his arrival to the world with appropriate drama. "What should we name him?" Miriam asked, exhausted but smiling as she watched Harrison cradle their son. Harrison thought for a moment. "What about Henry?" he suggested. "Henry Bridger. It was my grandfather's name and he was a good man." "Henry," Miriam repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Henry Daniel Bridger after both our families." Harrison nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Henry Daniel Bridger," he agreed. "Welcome to the world, son." The early months of parenthood were exhausting but wonderful. Henry was a demanding baby, waking frequently in the night to nurse, and seeming to require constant attention during the day. But Harrison and Miriam adapted, taking turns walking the floor with him when he was fussy, marveling at every small milestone. His first smile, the first time he reached for a toy, the way his eyes followed them around the room. As Henry grew, the ranch thrived as well. Harrison was able to expand his herd with the money he made from selling cattle, and he hired on a part-time hand, a young Mexican man named Carlos who was reliable and hardworking. With the extra help, Harrison had more time to spend with his family, and he made the most of it, playing with Henry and helping Miriam with the household chores that had become more challenging with a baby to care for. In the summer of 1881, when Henry was almost 2 years old, Miriam discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in March of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Harrison's mother. Margaret had Harrison's gray eyes and Miriam's dark hair, and from the start, she was a calmer, easier baby than her brother had been. With 2 children and a growing ranch, life became busier but also richer. Harrison built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their expanding family. Miriam started a small egg and butter business, selling the surplus from their chickens and the cow Harrison had bought to the general store in town. The extra income was modest but steady, and it gave Miriam a sense of pride and independence that she valued. The children grew healthy and strong. Henry was adventurous and curious, always getting into things and asking endless questions about how everything worked. Margaret was quieter and more observant, content to sit and watch the world around her with those solemn gray eyes. Harrison and Miriam raised them with love and firm guidance, teaching them the value of hard work, honesty, and kindness to others. As the years passed, the ranch became more than just a place where they lived and worked. It became a true home, filled with the sounds of children's laughter, the smell of Miriam's cooking, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Harrison would sometimes stand on the porch in the evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, and marvel at how much his life had changed since that day in 1878, when he had seen a woman in rags step off a stagecoach and decided to help her. In the spring of 1885, when Henry was 5 and Margaret was 3, Miriam became pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous 2, and Miriam suffered from severe nausea and fatigue throughout the first few months. Harrison worried about her constantly, but she insisted she was fine, that this was just part of the process. In November of that year, Miriam went into labor 3 weeks earlier than expected. The labor was fast and intense, and there was no time to send for Mrs. Martinez. Harrison had to deliver the baby himself, his hands shaking but steady as he guided his second daughter into the world. The baby was small but healthy, with a surprisingly loud cry for such a tiny thing. They named her Rose, because she had come into the world during the brief period when the desert wildflowers bloomed, turning the harsh landscape into a riot of color. Rose had Miriam's amber eyes and a full head of dark hair, and from the start, she was a fighter, determined to make her presence known despite her small size. With 3 children, the house was often chaotic and noisy, but Harrison and Miriam would not have had it any other way. They had built something good here in the Arizona desert, something that would last beyond their own lives. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had created a legacy, a working ranch, a strong family, and a love that had weathered every storm and grown deeper with each passing year. In 1887, the town of Agua Caliente decided to build a proper school, and they asked Miriam to serve on the committee to organize it. She accepted eagerly, having always valued education and wanting to ensure that her children and the other children in the area had access to good learning. She worked alongside other townswomen to raise funds, recruit a teacher, and prepare the small building that would serve as the schoolhouse. When the school opened in the fall of 1888, Henry was one of the first students to attend. He thrived in the classroom environment, his natural curiosity finding an outlet in books and lessons. Margaret would start the following year, and eventually, Rose would join her siblings. Miriam felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her children would have opportunities she had never had, that they would grow up educated and able to make their own choices about their futures. As the 1880s drew to a close, Harrison and Miriam reflected on how far they had come. The ranch was now well established, with a solid house, productive land, and a healthy herd of cattle. They had 3 beautiful children who brought them joy every single day. They were respected members of the community, known for their hard work, integrity, and generosity. One evening in late December of 1889, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Harrison and Miriam sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the winter chill. They watched the stars emerge in the clear desert sky, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night when Miriam had arrived in Agua Caliente, lost and desperate and hoping for a miracle. You ever think about what might have happened if I had not stopped to talk to you that day? Harrison asked. Miriam considered the question. Sometimes, she admitted, but I try not to dwell on it. The fact is, you did stop, you did help me, and because of that kindness, we have this life we have built together. I told you back then that I did not need riches, Harrison said. Do you remember? I remember, Miriam said softly. You said you did not need riches, you needed me. And I meant it, Harrison said, taking her hand. Every word. You are the greatest treasure I could have ever found. Not because of what you do or how you help run the ranch, but because of who you are. You are brave and strong and full of love. You made me believe in the possibility of happiness when I had almost given up on finding it. Miriam leaned her head on his shoulder. You gave me a second chance at life, she said. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I had nothing. Not just no money or possessions, but no hope, no future. You gave me all of that back. You saw past the rags and the dirt and the desperation, and you saw someone worth saving. You were always worth saving, Harrison said. I just helped you see it yourself. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, content in each other's presence. After 11 years of marriage, they had learned that sometimes words were not necessary, that simply being together was enough. "What do you think the future holds for us?" Miriam asked eventually. "More of the same, I hope," Harrison said. "Watching our children grow up, working the land, growing old together. Nothing fancy or exciting, just a good life lived with the person I love most in the world." "That sounds perfect to me," Miriam said. And it was perfect in all the ways that mattered. As the years continued to pass, the Bridger family remained a cornerstone of the Agua Caliente community. Harrison and Miriam raised their children with the same values that had sustained them through their own struggles. Hard work, honesty, compassion, and the understanding that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the people you loved and the life you built together. Henry grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch and planned to take it over from his father someday. Margaret became a talented artist, drawing and painting the desert landscapes she had grown up with, eventually selling her work to visitors passing through the territory. Rose, the baby who had come early and fought so hard to survive, grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's determination and her father's steady nature. In 1895, when Henry turned 16, Harrison officially made him a partner in the ranch operations. They worked side by side, father and son, expanding the herd and improving the land. Margaret, now 13, helped her mother with the household and the egg business, which had grown considerably over the years. Rose, at 10 years old, was still attending school but spent her free time riding her horse across the desert, exploring and dreaming about her future. Miriam, now 43 years old, looked back on her life with wonder and gratitude. The frightened, desperate woman who had arrived in Agua Caliente with nothing but the ragged clothes on her back seemed like a different person entirely, someone from a distant story. She had survived loss and hardship, and had come out the other side stronger and happier than she could have ever imagined. One day, in early spring of 1896, a stranger arrived in Agua Caliente, asking questions about a Miriam Blackwell. The stranger, a lawyer from Kansas City, had been hired to locate Miriam by her older brother, whom she had not seen or heard from in nearly 20 years. The brother, it turned out, had done well for himself in business and had been searching for his lost sister for years, ever since their parents had passed away and he had inherited the family farm. When the lawyer appeared at the Bridger ranch and explained his purpose, Miriam was overwhelmed. She had long since given up hope of ever reconnecting with her family back in Missouri, had assumed they thought she was dead or had simply forgotten about her. But her brother had never stopped looking, and now he was inviting her to come visit him in Kansas City, with all expenses paid. Harrison encouraged her to go to reconnect with this piece of her past. "Take Margaret with you," he suggested. "She has never seen a big city, and it would be good for both of you to have some time together. Henry, Rose, and I can manage the ranch for a few weeks." So in April of 1896, Miriam and Margaret took the train to Kansas City, where they were reunited with Miriam's brother Thomas and his family. It was an emotional reunion, with tears and laughter and endless stories shared. Thomas was horrified to learn about all that Miriam had been through after leaving Missouri, but he was also proud of the life she had built for herself in Arizona. He offered to give her money to help set her up more comfortably, but Miriam refused. "I have everything I need," she told him. "A good husband, 3 wonderful children, a home that I love. I do not need money, Thomas. I just needed to know that I still have family who cares about me." Thomas accepted this, though he insisted on giving Margaret a generous gift to help with her art supplies and education. He also promised to visit Arizona someday, to meet Harrison and the rest of the family and see the ranch that Miriam spoke of with such obvious pride. When Miriam and Margaret returned home 3 weeks later, Harrison and the children were waiting at the small train station in Agua Caliente. Harrison swept Miriam into his arms, holding her tight, and she realized that this was where she truly belonged. Kansas City had been interesting, and reconnecting with Thomas had been wonderful, but Arizona was home now. This dusty desert town, this small ranch, this family she had built with Harrison was her real life, the one that mattered. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th century approached, the Bridger Ranch continued to prosper. Harrison and Miriam, now in their late 40s, began to slow down a bit, letting Henry take on more of the heavy ranch work while they focused on the aspects of the operation they enjoyed most. Harrison spent more time breeding and training horses, which he had always loved, while Miriam expanded her egg and butter business and began teaching younger women in town her cooking and household management skills. In 1899, Henry married a local girl named Sarah, and they built a small house on the far corner of the ranch property. Within a year, they had given Harrison and Miriam their first grandchild, a boy they named Thomas Harrison after both of his grandfathers. Miriam was thrilled to be a grandmother, doting on the baby and helping Sarah learn the ropes of motherhood. Margaret, now 20, had decided to move to Tucson to pursue her art more seriously. She had been accepted into a small art program there and had also found work illustrating for a local newspaper. Harrison and Miriam were proud of her courage in pursuing her dreams, even though they missed having her around the ranch. Rose, at 14, was showing signs of being just as strong-willed and independent as her mother. She had announced her intention to become a teacher, inspired by the education she had received at the Agua Caliente school. Miriam supported this goal wholeheartedly, setting aside money from her business to help pay for Rose's eventual teacher training. In the spring of 1901, on the 23rd anniversary of the day they had met, Harrison took Miriam back into town to the spot where he had first seen her step off the stagecoach. The town had grown considerably in the intervening years, with new buildings and paved streets, but the basic layout was the same. "You remember what you were thinking that day?" Harrison asked as they stood there hand in hand. "I remember being terrified," Miriam said. "I had no idea what was going to happen to me, where I would sleep that night, how I would eat. And then this cowboy walked up to me and offered to buy me lunch, and everything changed. Best decision I ever made," Harrison said, approaching that scared woman in rags and offering her help. "I was not just in rags," Miriam pointed out with a smile. "I had literally nothing. No money, no possessions, no prospects, just desperation and a faint hope that somehow things would work out." "And they did work out," Harrison said, "better than either of us could have planned." "Because you did not need riches," Miriam said softly, echoing the words he had spoken to her so many years ago. "You just needed me." "I still do," Harrison said, pulling her close. "Every single day I still need you. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life." "Nothing about that has changed in 23 years, and nothing will ever change it." Miriam kissed him there in the middle of the street, not caring who might see or what they might think. After all these years, after everything they had been through together, she had learned that love was not something to hide or be ashamed of. It was something to celebrate, to cherish, to hold onto with both hands and never let go. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the desert in those familiar shades of gold and purple that Miriam had come to love so much. The house was lit from within, warm and welcoming, and they could see Rose moving around in the kitchen, probably preparing dinner. In the distance, they could see lights in Henry and Sarah's house, and they could hear the faint cry of baby Thomas demanding attention. This was their legacy, Miriam thought as Harrison helped her down from the wagon. This ranch, this family, this life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. She had arrived in Agua Caliente 23 years ago with nothing but rags and desperation. She had been saved by a cowboy who saw past her circumstances to the person beneath, who had offered her not just charity but genuine partnership and eventually love. And now, looking around at everything they had created together, she understood that true wealth had nothing to do with money or possessions or social standing. True wealth was measured in the strength of the bonds you forged, the lives you touched, the love you gave and received. By that measure, she and Harrison were the richest people she knew. As the years continued to roll by, the Bridger family grew and changed with the times. The 20th century brought new technologies and new challenges to the Arizona territory. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, and the town of Agua Caliente celebrated with a parade and festival. Harrison and Miriam, now in their 60s and both showing silver in their hair, rode in the parade with other pioneer families who had helped settle the region. Henry and Sarah had 3 more children by then, giving Harrison and Miriam 4 grandchildren in total. Margaret had married an artist she met in Tucson, and they had 1 daughter. Rose had completed her teacher training and was now teaching at the Agua Caliente school, where she had once been a student. She had also recently become engaged to a young doctor who had set up practice in town. In 1915, Harrison suffered a minor heart episode that scared everyone, but ultimately turned out to be more of a warning than a true crisis. The doctor told him to slow down, to let Henry handle more of the ranch work, and to focus on enjoying his remaining years rather than working himself into an early grave. Harrison grumbled about this advice but ultimately followed it, recognizing that he was not as young as he used to be and that he had earned the right to take things easier. He spent more time with Miriam, taking walks around the property, sitting on the porch watching the grandchildren play, and reminiscing about the early days of their life together. They laughed about the mistakes they had made, the hardships they had endured, and the triumphs they had celebrated. Every memory was precious, every year together a gift. In the fall of 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic reached even remote Agua Caliente. The town lost several residents, including some of Harrison and Miriam's friends and neighbors. The family was lucky. Although several of them got sick, everyone recovered, including Harrison, whose heart condition had made him particularly vulnerable. That brush with mortality made both Harrison and Miriam more conscious of their time together, more determined to make the most of whatever years they had left. They became even more involved with their grandchildren, passing on stories and skills, ensuring that the next generation understood where they had come from and what values they should carry forward. In 1920, Miriam turned 68 years old. Harrison threw her a surprise party at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew from town and the surrounding area. The house and yard were filled with people, children running around playing games, adults sharing food and conversation, and Miriam at the center of it all, glowing with happiness and surrounded by love. During the party, several people stood up to make toasts to Miriam, talking about her kindness, her strength, her contributions to the community. But it was Harrison's toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. 42 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I met a woman who had nothing. She had lost her husband, lost her money, lost everything that made her feel secure and safe in the world. She stepped off a stagecoach wearing rags, with no idea what her future held. And I looked at her and I thought, here is someone who needs help. So I offered her a meal and a job, thinking I was doing a good deed, thinking I was being charitable. He paused, looking directly at Miriam with eyes full of love. What I did not realize at the time was that she was not the only one who had nothing. Oh, I had land and a house and cattle, sure. But I did not have a partner. I did not have love. I did not have someone to share my life with, someone to build a future with. I was just as lost as she was in my own way. Miriam reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. When I asked Miriam to work for me, when I eventually asked her to marry me, I told her something I meant with my whole heart. I said, I do not need riches. I need you. And that has been true every single day of our 42 years together. Miriam gave me everything that matters: love, family, purpose, joy. She turned a house into a home, a piece of land into a legacy, a lonely cowboy into a husband and father and grandfather. His voice cracked slightly with emotion. So today, as we celebrate her birthday, I want everyone here to know that I am the lucky one. I am the one who got rich beyond measure when that woman in rags arrived in Agua Caliente and agreed to take a chance on me. Happy birthday, Miriam. Thank you for every moment we have shared, and for every moment still to come. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, and Miriam stood up and kissed Harrison, not caring that everyone was watching. This man had saved her life in every way that mattered, and she had saved his right back. They had rescued each other from loneliness and uncertainty, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. As the party continued into the evening, Miriam looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the friends and neighbors who had become like family over the decades, at the ranch that had been built by hard work and sustained by love. She thought about that terrified woman in rags who had arrived in this town so many years ago, and she wished she could tell that woman that everything would be okay, better than okay. Life had not always been easy. There had been struggles and sorrows along the way, losses and disappointments. But through it all, she had Harrison by her side, and he had her. They had faced every challenge as partners, celebrated every victory together, and built a life that was rich in all the ways that truly mattered. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Harrison and Miriam celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a massive celebration, with people coming from all over Arizona to honor the couple who had become legends in their own time, symbols of love and perseverance and the pioneer spirit. By this time, Harrison was 76 years old, and Miriam was 76 as well. They had slowed down considerably, spending most of their time on the porch of the house Harrison had built so many decades ago, watching the world go by and enjoying each other's company. The ranch was now fully managed by Henry and his oldest son, young Thomas, who had grown into a capable rancher in his own right. Margaret and her family visited frequently from Tucson, and Rose, who had married her doctor and had 2 children of her own, lived just down the road in town. The family had grown large and sprawling, with branches reaching across Arizona and even into California and New Mexico. But the ranch remained the heart of it all, the place where everyone came home to, the physical embodiment of Harrison and Miriam's love and commitment. In the spring of 1930, Harrison's health began to fail more seriously. He had another, more severe heart episode, and the doctor told the family to prepare for the worst. Harrison was bedridden for several weeks, with Miriam rarely leaving his side. She held his hand, read to him, reminded him of all the wonderful memories they had shared over their 52 years of marriage. One evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in those familiar gold and purple shades, Harrison squeezed Miriam's hand weakly and said, "I love you. From that very first day I loved you. Do not ever forget that." "I could never forget," Miriam said, tears streaming down her face. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Harrison Bridger. You gave me everything worth having in this life." "And you gave it all back to me," Harrison whispered. "We had a good life, did we not?" "The best life," Miriam agreed. "The very best." Harrison smiled, his eyes drifting closed. "I do not need riches," he murmured, repeating the words he had said to her so many years ago. "I just need you." "And you have me," Miriam said, holding his hand tight. "Always and forever you have me." Harrison passed away peacefully that night, with Miriam by his side and his children gathered around his bed. The funeral was one of the largest Agua Caliente had ever seen, with people traveling from all over the state to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Miriam mourned her husband deeply, feeling his loss like a physical ache in her chest. But she did not fall apart, did not lose herself in grief. She had learned over the course of her long life that pain was part of the human experience, that loss was inevitable, but that love persisted even after death. Harrison would always be with her, in her memories, in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built together. She lived for 3 more years after Harrison's death, staying on at the ranch under Henry's care, still sharp-minded and engaged with the family despite her advanced age. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren, tending a small flower garden Harrison had planted for her years before, and writing down the history of the Bridger family so that future generations would know where they came from and what their ancestors had sacrificed and built. On a clear April day in 1933, Miriam passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 81. She was buried next to Harrison in the small cemetery outside Agua Caliente under a shared headstone that read, "Harrison and Miriam Bridger." They arrived with nothing but each other, and they created everything that mattered. The ranch continued on under Henry's management, and then eventually passed to young Thomas and his children. The Bridger name became synonymous with integrity, hard work, and the values that had sustained Harrison and Miriam throughout their long life together. The story of how they met, how a cowboy had helped a desperate woman in rags and found love in the process, became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. Decades later, when great-great-grandchildren asked about their ancestors, they would hear the tale of Miriam arriving in Agua Caliente with nothing, wearing rags and carrying no possessions, and how Harrison had looked at her and seen not someone to be pitied but someone to be valued. They would hear about how he had said, "I do not need riches, I need you," and how that simple statement had been the foundation of a love that lasted over 5 decades and created a legacy that would endure for generations. The story served as a reminder that true wealth was not measured in money or possessions, but in the strength of the bonds we forge, the love we give and receive, and the families we build through commitment and partnership. Harrison and Miriam had started with nothing material, but they had everything that mattered: each other, determination, hope, and love. And from those humble beginnings, they had created something magnificent, a life and a legacy that would be remembered and celebrated long after they were gone. The ranch still stood in Agua Caliente, now a historic landmark that tourists sometimes visited to learn about pioneer life in Arizona. The house had been preserved and maintained by the family, with many of the original features intact. Visitors could see the kitchen where Miriam had cooked thousands of meals, the porch where Harrison and Miriam had spent countless evenings watching the sunset, the bedroom where their children had been born, and where they had eventually died, still together even at the end. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the desert wind blew soft and gentle across the land, local people swore they could feel the presence of Harrison and Miriam still there, still watching over the ranch and the family they had created, still together in whatever came after this life, bound by a love that had proven stronger than poverty, hardship, loss, or even death itself. Their story was a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of seeing the value in others even when circumstances obscure it, and the transformative potential of love that is built on mutual respect, shared work, and genuine partnership. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures in life arrive in the most unexpected packages, and that being open to helping others, to seeing their potential rather than just their present circumstances, can lead to blessings beyond measure. Harrison and Miriam Bridger had lived a simple life by many standards. They had never been wealthy in monetary terms, never traveled the world or achieved fame or recognition beyond their small community. But they had loved deeply, worked hard, raised good children, and built something lasting. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for? What greater measure of success could there be than a life well lived, a love that endured, and a legacy that inspired others to be kind, to be brave, and to believe in the possibility that even when you have nothing, you can still find everything you need in the love and partnership of another human being. The Bridger story became woven into the fabric of Agua Caliente's history, taught in the local school as an example of pioneer perseverance, and celebrated every year at the town's Heritage Festival. The original house and ranch, now maintained by the Bridger Family Foundation, served as both a museum and a working ranch, continuing the traditions that Harrison and Miriam had established over a century before. And so the story ends not with sadness but with celebration, not with loss but with the understanding that some things never truly end. Love that is real and deep and built on solid foundations does not disappear when the people who created it pass away. It lives on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry their genes and their values. It lives on in the stories told around dinner tables and at family gatherings. It lives on in the very land itself, the ranch that was built by their hands and sustained by their commitment. Miriam had arrived in rags with nothing, and Harrison had said he did not need riches. He needed her. Together, they had proven that they needed nothing more than each other to create a life of meaning, purpose, and deep satisfaction. Their love story, born in the harsh beauty of the Arizona desert, forged in hardship and sustained through decades of partnership, stood as a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who heard it. A reminder that the greatest wealth any of us can ever possess is the love we share and the lives we touch along the way.